and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. So for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Rachel Beck, and I started out my career as a primary school teacher. I had my first child 21 years ago, which is also when I founded Educating Matters. And that was partly driven by a desire to work more flexibly, and also because I passionately believed I could have a greater impact on the lives of children by supporting and guiding parents. So along with having a further 3 children, since 2001, I've been mainly working with organisations to support their working parents with all aspects of educating, raising children, and integrating work and family. And over time, our Educating Matters offering has really evolved. So we have a whole host of expert speakers who address a broad range of diverse topics like mental health, neurodiversity, LGBTQ+, menopause, allyship, carers. And I want to introduce you to our wonderful speaker. And to be perfectly honest, I only met him a few weeks ago through the magical powers of LinkedIn. And we scheduled a 30-minute chat. And I think after more than an hour of Tim sharing his journey and insightful ideas, I just felt really strongly that in celebration of International Men's Day, I wanted to invite my network to engage in a broader conversation about modern fatherhood, mental health, and how we can strive to facilitate more gender-neutral support for parents in the workplace. Now, my previous cross-company conversations have generated pages and pages of discussion on the site. So please feel free, as Tim and I are talking, to just chat amongst yourselves, share your own experiences, what really resonates. This is also a place to normalize common challenges that you are facing. But Tim and I also really want this hour to be thought-provoking, empowering, practical, so that if you can go away feeling inspired and having some realistic action points that are free, and we will leave time at the end for you to ask questions. So whilst you're talking, if a question pops up into your head, you can post that in the Q&A section. It's just a bit easier to have questions in that section and the chat in the chat. And this session is being recorded. So if you need to leave early or you want to share it with others, please feel free to do so. And you're all going to automatically get that recording after. So before I ask Tim my first question, I'll just share with you, have a look, the poll results. So 66% of the audience are dads, 11% are mums, and then we've got a few other categories. So that's just helpful to know who we are speaking to. And Tim, so if I can just ask you the first question, can you just let the audience know a little bit about your personal story and also how you became this champion for dads in the workplace?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it to a few minutes, but essentially I am a dad. My daughter is 14 years old and I'm currently married and have 2 stepdaughters as well. And they're both from previous relationships, so I'm part of a blended family at the moment. But if I think about my fatherhood journey, as I said, when I was speaking in government the other week, I was very much kind of an elbows in dad from the start. So what do I mean by elbows in? I mean, in the hospital, I was taking no nonsense. I didn't want to be told I was insignificant. I didn't want to be told that I couldn't go and see my daughter, etc. And thankfully, that was well received from the start. I've loved my daughter without limit since the first moment I knew she was going to be alive. And she, when she was born, and the first 10, 11, 12 years of her life, she was a typical, what you might call daddy's girl. So she loves her dad. And we had a great relationship to the point where I think her mum possibly was jealous at times. But, you know, one of the points I want to make today is that love you have for your child as a parent, no matter whether you're a mum or a dad, is constant. And it's constant through all the mistakes you make as a parent. And it's constant throughout all the emotions you have as a parent. And what happened in 2019, so just before the pandemic, is I moved in with my now wife. And sadly, Ashley, my daughter, just wanted to come to my house less and less. So I was since the divorce, which was about 8 years ago, we'd had 50-50, at least 50-50. In fact, I had more than 50% of Ashley's time with me at the start, and I wanted no less than 50-50. And that just started to slip away when I moved into this new house. So she stopped wanting to come during the week. Kind of made my peace with that, because as children get towards teenagers, they probably want their stuff in one room and less bag packing. And I was quite happy as long as I had the contact and the relationship with her, I was content. But then she stopped wanting to come on the weekends that I had with her as well. That started to get me a little bit emotional until she stopped wanting to come to my house at all. And she would freeze when she got there. She would have almost panic attacks and anxiety. And eventually I had a bit of a breakdown with that and left my now wife, who was my fiance at the time, and made a promise to my daughter, Ashley, that we'd get a house together. And then my heart broke in a different way, because I just left someone who I loved. And it was a real struggle for me, because I felt like I couldn't have the two most important people in my life at the same time. And I hit a period, and this is last year now, hit a period of depression. So for about three and a half months, I was just incapacitated with this depression, when I was going through this period of time when I was separated from my fiance, went back to her. Then my daughter didn't want anything to do with me because of that. And yeah, people don't understand what the difference between depression and sadness is. And I kind of explain it a bit like the difference between a migraine and a headache. You just know when you've got a migraine, and you just know when you're kind of paralyzed with depression. I've never experienced it before. I didn't know how to do, or how to come out of it, what to do. And suddenly, I don't know what happened. One day I spoke to a friend out loud about how I was feeling inside, and felt a little sense of relief. That there wasn't any judgment from that conversation. And this was one of my kind of alpha male football related friends that I would never have imagined would react in the way he did. But what a pleasant surprise. Starts talking to me then about, oh, he's been going through a period of depression as well. And we suddenly start supporting each other. And I took this on, and I started kind of going through a phased recovery and a phased return to work. So I've been signed off sick for 3 months. I came back gradually, and I started to talk to people just on a daily how I was feeling at work as well. And again, like, what a pleasant surprise. I'm an actuary, so we're on charge out rates. We're actuaries, fairly expensive per hour, but people were giving up their time to listen. They were quite happy to listen every time I spoke. And every time I did that, I felt a little bit better. And then I made a full return to work, and saw that in Aon, they've got this space for parents and carers. So it's called a business resource group, but essentially it's a network within Aon where I work that is a safe space for parents and carers to talk about how they're feeling about caring responsibilities, elderly or children. And there was a special part of that called Dads at Aon. And they asked me if I would like to be chair of Dads at Aon when I joined the network, because I'd done a lot of talking out loud in the parents network. And I said, yeah, absolutely, why not? And can we change the scope of it, I said, to not just banging a drum for equal policies in terms of parental leave, but actually, can we expand it to all things dad, where we get dads talking about how they feel about balancing work and life, how they feel about being a parent, how they feel as a male in general, in terms of opening up. And when I started sharing in that group, which is essentially a WebEx Teams space chat within work, a big WhatsApp group, I found that other dads really did jump on the bandwagon and they started doing the same. And it took off. So we had about 40 people in there and we've hit over 100 now, a year later. So it's more than doubled.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I think, the answer to your question, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I'd like to kind of put this question to the audience as well, but I want to get your insight. So how, especially since it seems a lot of people actually are dads on this call, how would you define modern fatherhood? So I put that to the audience and to you. And I don't know, just before we get to that, people are really thanking you for being so open. And I think it just shows the power of starting those conversations. And you know where it can take you.
It's appreciated.
Yeah. So modern fatherhood, what does that actually mean to you?
I've written down 4 words to describe it. I want to explain each one. So the 4 words are mindset, diversity, connections, and expectations. So mindset, I'm actually quoting now from someone called Elliot Ray, who was on BBC One on Monday night on a program called Becoming Dad. And that's on the iPlayer if you want to go and look that up. But he said, and this is the mindset. So he said, dads can live full and whole lives if they allow themselves to balance work and family life. So our dad's a barrier to themselves, well, under modern fatherhood, they wouldn't be. Diversity. So you are a dad, you can be a dad via birth, via adoption, via surrogacy, and you can be part of an opposite sex or same-sex couple. So dads will come in many shapes and sizes. That's diversity. Connections. In modern fatherhood, in my mind, I didn't know until I was 40 years old how to make proper connections with male friends. My wife said to me once, Tim, when was the last time you organized something that wasn't to do with football? Just to text your friend to go out for a coffee or something. And that I've only really learned in the last year, and I'm doing it all the time. And it's like the world's a different place. And that is so important for men and dads. So that's part of it's connections and expectations. So everyone's got an autopilot in their brain when a mum becomes pregnant, and the autopilot is quite rightly, she's going to need time off. She's going to need support. We're going to have to check in with her. When she comes back, will she go part-time? What support will she need when she comes back to carry on with her career? All brilliant thinking, but that autopilot needs to be for anybody who's a parent or a carer, to be honest, because the caring responsibilities for other members of your family that are older than you take just as much of a mental toll. So that autopilot thinking in modern fatherhood or modern parenthood, as you could call it, is the expectations thing from everybody else. And that's it. That's how I would.
Thank you. So I love the way you describe that, because people usually say more like practical things, so those are like some really clear themes. I just want to read. I think that with the recording, it doesn't keep the chat. So just to share for anyone that listens later, people are saying things like spinning plates, being present with your whole self. Like someone mentioned, coming from an Asian culture, father wasn't around much growing up, and loving how involved they are with this new generation. Modern Father is doing everything for your child, not just as a dad, but as a parent, changing the narrative absolutely from mum does this, dad does that, being fully involved, taking a lead role. Like, I really hate it when, you know, schools do things and workplaces like often the mum is the first contact and like the first one they'll call, or at work. I've had stories from dads saying, oh, you know, I can't now make that meeting because I've got to take my daughter to a medical appointment. And they've actually said, well, why can't their mother do it? I mean, hopefully we're moving away from that.
Can I say,
yeah.
Can I say, Rachel, I think actually it probably summarizes everything that I've just said, but we need to take away a term for everybody, which is parenting out loud.
Yeah.
This is a phrase that I heard someone say once, and it just stuck with me. Parenting out loud. Like, that sums up everything that I've said about modern fatherhood. It's making connections, saying it out loud. It's putting things in your work calendar that say you've got parenting responsibilities that work needs to fit around. I've got a school run at 3 p.m. That's in as a blocked out period of time in my calendar. I'm going to parents' evening then, I can't be contacted. But yeah, parenting out loud as a takeaway for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Pascal's made a good point that, like, even a lot of children's books, especially the more traditional ones, have, you know, that narrative about a connection with more the mother, and not as much as a father. So there's so much kind of, you know, old-fashioned gender stereotypes that are coming from all sorts of different angles that we need to be aware of. And just kind of check that narrative and what we're sharing with our kids. So what do you see? I mean, I have lots of thoughts about this because I've been working in this space for, like I said, over 20 years. But what do you see as the main barriers in the workplace for families? And also, more importantly, because we want to get to the practical bit, what does good support for working parents look like? And I'd love to get the audience as well to share their experience of barriers, but also what's really helped or supported them. And I'm going to just, I don't want to overflow everyone, but I'm going to also just launch another poll to get a quick steer of how much gender neutral support you think there is in the workplace.
Okay, that's a great question, and I think the barriers are the same as the solutions. So what do I mean by that? Well, I went to Parliament in May to accept an award on behalf of Aon, my employer, for what we've done to support working dads on leadership and culture. So the awards themselves were split into 4 themes. So you could get an award as a company for the policies that you have. And I call that the boring bit, the black and white bit that's just really easy to solve. The return to work support that you have. So how is people's career progression? Do they slot back into the same? Do they pick up where they left off? Has someone filled their shoes in your absence? What opportunities have they got? What support do they get? The return to work is crucial. Flexible working these days is fairly good post-pandemic in a lot of companies, but possibly leaves a lot to be desired in others. And leadership and culture. So those 4 things are all ways you can support your working parents. And the leadership and culture piece is free. So what are the barriers? I guess, well, if you have a policy that says dads get 2 weeks off, you might as well have a neon sign on the front of your company that says men must work and women must stay at home. And that, you know, that's, to me, that's the amount of time off and paid leave that dads get is an obvious barrier. So it's a no-brainer. As I said at the start, I think dads can be a barrier to themselves. So if you're not talking about being a dad at work, if you're not talking about something, most people won't know that there's an issue for you. And so that parenting out loud concept helps solve that barrier.
Yeah, someone was asking what you meant by that.
Yeah. And I mean, talking over the desks. I mean, asking the person next to you if you know they're a parent, how's the family? Just as part of everyday conversation. I did it today. I found out something new about someone today when I turned up. He's a dad, and I just know a little bit about his children now and what he's got going on. So,
And it's not
um,
kind of leaving your jacket on the back of the chair while you just pop off to sports day and pretend you've gone out for a meeting and you're coming back, which is things dads used to do, have to do more of. Like not actually wanting to admit that you're
yeah,
doing for your child.
exactly. So his dad's not being a barrier to themselves. I think what another barrier is possibly at times line managers. Is our line managers well enough trained in the diversity of their reports, of the people that report to them, and the issues, the range of issues that can come up for a human, and just looking at everybody the same, which is broader than just men, but as parents, it needs to be the same mindset for line managers. And sadly, in practice, it isn't at the moment. So I think we've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, Rachel. Is there anything you want me to expand on, or anything in the chat that people have got questions?
So there's something, where was it? I have to go back. So Brian was sharing that he's a huge advocate for parenting out loud, but it's a delicate balance. And he feels he's been criticised for putting family ahead of work because he's, so open about his responsibilities. Yeah. So it's the practicality of doing that is far from simple.
Well, I think work's important, but so is your family, and you do need to prioritize, don't you? Like each of them, and sometimes that conflicts. And as long as you feel able to have an open conversation and you can listen, and that is both listen to the needs from a family perspective of an employee, but also listen for the employee to listen to the business needs. And in any relationship, like open conversation and listening is crucial, isn't it? So I would like to think that sometimes you might have to put work stuff first, but on other days it could work the other way, and it wouldn't always be one side of the fence. I think that's what's important here. Not necessarily that if you put something in that's parenting, work has to go away, but also not vice versa.
And also, I think it's really important to point out, everyone has other responsibilities in their real life outside of work. So it's not only just parents, but you might, I don't know, be involved in a charity or volunteering, or have a neighbour you look after, or be climbing a mountain, or be a musician, or whatever, that you've got another part of your life which is also really, really important to you. I mean, there is a good point, and this comes up quite a bit as a challenge. Some companies that I approach say, well, working parents already get so much support, and what about everyone else? And this is where someone's written about it's important that your colleagues who aren't carers don't feel like that they are picking up for you. And it's a balance of everyone's needs. And earlier this week, I had a meeting with ITV about some work we might do next year, and they had something called they have a balance network, and they had something, I think it was called the value partnership, where in all those conversations that you're having, whether it's with a colleague or a manager, you think about three elements. You think about yourself, of course, and your particular circumstances and your needs, but you're also considering the needs of your team and how it functions, and the needs of the business more broadly. But in my experience, when you give parents that kind of trust and autonomy when they really need it, I mean, look where you've come out from having that support from Aon when you were going through a really challenging time and having 3 months out of not being able to work, that you've come back such an incredible advocate. You've allowed them to win an award. It's kind of driven your whole experience.
Yeah.
And it's great stuff you're going to be going forward. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm reading a book at the moment it's called The Self-Driven Child.
somewhere.
People should look that up because it describes in there stress being caused by some form of something that is out of your control. Like everybody's stress is caused by some form of lack of control. So if you've got some kind of autonomy over working around the things that are important to you outside of work and work itself, then I think you're a happier and less stressed person generally. And if the world is full of happier and less stressed people, then going to be more productive. So you make a really good point. And yes, people that are not parents are absolutely relevant as well. And their needs, whatever they are, because they will have things going on outside of work that is not, and as do parents, there are other things that are not parenting and that are issues for people in life. Might be grief, could be, but there's an endless list.
Yeah.
There's
a real split, like it's almost 50-50. 53% are saying they don't see that gender neutral support at work.
Yeah.
There's an interesting point raised by Nicholas, who's saying if you choose to prioritize family before being in a senior role, it will slow down career progression. I don't know. I mean, that's the reality for some people, but I don't know whether everyone would agree with that or how you would suggest navigating that, because again, that's your own internal barrier about your assumptions and expectations.
Yeah, that's a big point and a big question, because sadly that probably is the case at the moment. And I was at a diversity and inclusion gala dinner last night for the Dive-In Festival, which is the insurance industry's diversity and inclusion festival globally. And I was talking a lot about, okay, yeah, you put these strap lines and you do these events and everything's brilliant, all flashy events, we are diverse, we are inclusive, but what are you actually going to do? Like, what does an office look like tomorrow when I go in that supports the thing that you're trying to be inclusive for? Like, what do I have to do on a practical level tomorrow? Because you can't change these things overnight. And the point that was made that you've read out, Rachel, is true. But if you never change your mindset and you never change your thought process, then nothing will ever happen. So we have to start somewhere. The other, and yeah, if you take time out for parenting, are you going to take longer to get to a senior role? Well, I think an important part of that thought process is gender parity. So if that's the case, then fine, but it possibly shouldn't be any different for mums and dads, men and women. And sadly, there is a gender pay gap. And as I'm learning in the pensions industry at the moment, I've just joined an industry working group, there's a bigger gender pensions gap. And fundamentally, a gender pensions gap in retirement is caused by time out of the workforce, like out of work for whatever reason, whether that's less time because you're working part-time, less time because you're on maternity, paternity leave. And what I'd like to strive for, what I'd like to see really is policy change such that wouldn't be different based on your gender. And then that would feed into equality, but that's going to take a long time, which is what I meant by, and this 50%, this poll shows the same thing. We've come a long way. That'd probably be less than 50% a few years ago. So we're 50-50, which is good, but how do we get to 75 or 100?
There's some really, really insightful things being shared in the chat. The other thing I'm going to do is copy the whole thing. I'll take out the names, but share that as well so people can get a gist of what people are saying. I think I can't read all of it and really focus on what you're saying too, but I really like something that was mentioned by Sam, who says that he feels slightly awkward saying it, but having been thrust into a more senior role, he's got less energy for the parenting role. And him and his partner split parenting quite evenly, but then that additional pressure and hours is very difficult to manage in the context of parenting responsibilities. And thank you for sharing that. And it's just a really real thing.
Yeah.
So much of how you parent, and I do loads of work with parents around raising children and managing to self-regulate and stay calm and all of that. And so much of how you parent has actually got nothing to do with your child, but it's a lot more about what's going on with you internally, what's going on with your work and your responsibilities. And we go in waves of, depending on what else is going on in our circumstances, being able to be really focused and involved. And to be honest, that's why I hate this term work-life balance, because that whole vision of a set of scales where it's like constantly trying to balance, it's not realistic. It's more about just trying to create boundaries around your work, your family, and that time for yourself. And what you described, Tim, really thinking about that time for social interaction between, really speaking to friends and family and colleagues about how you're really feeling. I do think that one of the plus sides of going through a global pandemic is people just are naturally a lot more open, not just about their physical health, but about their mental health. I'm interested. Yeah, go on.
Can I say something there? Elliot, and again, I go back to Elliot Ray, but he said to me once that lots and lots of dads have said to him that they didn't know their children before the pandemic. So they didn't actually know what their children's favorite food was. Like, for example, because they didn't get home in time for tea. And I have a high pressure job. And as I said, I'm not seeing my daughter hasn't spoken to me for a year and a half, so I haven't got that balance at the moment. But I've had to deal with my own emotions and look after myself. And what I've learned is going home to my stepchildren and my wife every day is that I need to find something that takes 10 or 15 minutes to unwind before I go through the door, so that the first interaction when I get in can be something positive. I don't really,
I don't want to talk over you, but what I see happens so much is you've got that whole pressure of work and being there for your family. And what happens in that situation is we all drop ourselves off the list of what's important. And if how you feel physically and emotionally is literally at the bedrock of everything else. So if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be productive at work, and you're not going to be able to be there for your kids. So we're going to come up to questions soon, but I want to ask you just a couple more things. So you've obviously, we haven't even mentioned that you've now taken on to be co-chair of the Insurance Working Families Network as well. So what kind of specific examples could you give of things that you've done as chair of Dads at Aon, or what you hope to do being chair of that insurance network? Like, if people want something, really practical that they can do, or like to model like what you've done there that others could replicate.
And lots of people have asked me this directly, so I'm really glad you asked that, because I can tell everybody at the same time. So if in your company you want to start a parenting or dads network, I would say it's really simple and it will take you no time at all, and it's no time commitment either. All you need to do is, most companies these days have an internal Teams or WebEx space, whatever it is, for talking to colleagues remotely, and just set up a team. So have a parenting team and have a space within that for dads, and just start talking in it yourself. If you're comfortable, not everybody is, if you're comfortable to talk in it, just start talking about being a dad in that chat. Second thing, which again takes no time whatsoever, is have coffee mornings and catch-ups, and you could do those as infrequently as you like to work around a busy company, but suggest maybe quarterly or even 6 monthly to start off with. Just something in a diary to advertise in the company. We're having a dad's chat, and it's a theme. You could put a theme with it if you want. You could give it no theme and just give dads a chance to talk in that conversation about how they feel about being dads at work. Or you could give it themes. We've done themes on postnatal depression in men. That was quite powerful because one of the dads at Aon told his personal story about the postnatal depression that he had experienced, and it was quite moving and quite emotional. But he is one of our biggest supporters now, and I always get hearts from him when I'm commenting in the group, and you can tell how much it's helped him as much as it helped me. What other topics? Well, anything to do with parenting. We did one on shared parental leave, which was it's like the best policy available statutory at the moment. It's not ideal because you have to take from mum to give to dad, but we had a mum on that coffee morning talking about her experience of shared parental leave from her point of view. And one of the points she made was that it was really nice to be able to share, but she didn't feel quite ready to go back to work after half of the leave that they'd agreed to split. And so that was an interesting thing. So so coffee mornings and have a space, and it really is very little time commitment for that as a bare minimum. What else have we done? We have done events. So we did, most companies have got a way of recording an event these days and publishing, doing it online if they want externally. So we did Supporting Working Dads event, and we got our chief operating officer at Aon involved in hosting that. So we asked someone really senior to come along and host it, and that made this issue land on his desk, the issue of fatherhood and supporting dads. So that was really good. What else? You can write articles, you can do newsletters internally about various issues. This can be volunteer led, or if you've got some scope in your company to make it someone's job, then do that. And I think that's mainly it, and just be vocal online. In the insurance families network, we try to share best practice. So you don't just want to do something in your company. If you're doing it well, whether that's a policy you've got, or a return to work support thing, or a thing that leads to a great culture at work, then talk about it and share it, because that's going to help everybody else.
Great advice. And what I'm interested to know, obviously you've shared lots with us already, but you had this amazing opportunity to go to Parliament recently, didn't you?
I did.
And what were you saying in that room? This all parliamentary, was it the APPG on fatherhood?
Yeah, all party parliamentary group. So there's one on lots of things. It's MPs from all parties.
Were they listening to you?
Yeah, so I don't know how I landed. It was a follow-up to accepting the award on behalf of Aon in Parliament. And there is a fatherhood group in government where MPs from all parties come along once a quarter and talk about fatherhood. And I got to know the secretariat, which is a charity called Future Men. Look them up. They do a lot of good work supporting young fathers as well. They also do the meetings and minutes for the APPG. And they invited me to come along, having heard what we were doing at Aon, to talk about modern fatherhood in government. And were they listening, you said, Rachel? Well, one of the MPs, and I won't name him because he might watch this back, but he might know who he is when I say this. I think he fell asleep in the previous APPG meeting. And this meeting, he came in at the start and he said, I'm not going to be able to stay for the whole thing. I'm going to have to go. So I'm going to sit near the door. And then as we're packing up at the end, he was the last one to leave. So he was fully engaged, and he's been an MP since the 1970s. I essentially told them the story that I've told you today. The first slide that I put up was me and Ashley. One from when she was born 2 months premature, talking about how I was feeling at the time as dad. And one from the last time I saw her a year and a half ago when we were on holiday in Ibiza together, and what's happened since. So I based it on my own personal story. I then reminded them that there is lots of research that says dads are present and dads want to be involved. And as I said at the start of this, I made the point to the APPG that life is like a roller coaster and emotions and behaviors go up and down every day, but a love for a child doesn't. It's a flat line, like it's the same no matter what. And that's the same for dads. And then I rattled through what companies are doing that is great at the moment. And lots of companies are doing some great stuff. Obviously, got to mention Aviva with their policies and support for working parents. You see what other companies, Phoenix Group, NatWest, all doing great things on the policy front. So I just put a list up where the font was far too small for them to read on purpose, just to show that there was lots of them. And then I went on and said, actually, do you know what countries are doing as well? I don't just mean Finland, Sweden, and the Nordic countries that we all know about. I actually mean countries like Australia as well. And I read out a quote from the Australian Prime Minister that said that there is obviously social and economic gain to be had for a nation for equal support for parents. And it comes back to that thing we were saying about how you feel as a person and the autonomy over your life and the flexibility you've got. And I ended and said, it's not great in the UK from a statutory point of view. But is there hope for us? Because there is actually an open consultation on reviewing parental leave statutory policy that was opened in 2019, and we still haven't heard a response to that consultation. So I asked if we can have one, please. And I also noticed that there was something about neonatal leave and pay as well, which for me, with a daughter who was born 2 months premature at £2.12.
Wow.
My 2 weeks paternity leave didn't really cut it. You know, she hadn't come out of the plastic box way before I was able, after I went back to work, it didn't get anywhere near the 2 months. So that's what I said to Parliament in a nutshell. You know, I'm a dad, I care, everyone else whose dads cares, and we all want to be there. And then they said they've never really heard it from that angle before. They've had lots of people with research and statistics throwing numbers at them, but they haven't really had this kind of, oh, this is how it feels. And that's why it seemed to resonate. And now they want me to write an article in their parliamentary magazine. So I'm hoping the Prime Minister reads it and get some traction.
Thank you. So we're going to open it out to questions. So just to reiterate, you're going to receive after this a recording. Also, I'll share some tips around how organisations can support working parents. If you are interested in more insights just on the topic of parenting, I've got a blog section on my website. There's other recordings of panel discussions I've had with some really inspiring dads. Please, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you can join my conversations about all things parenting and diversity and inclusion. I've got a self-study online parenting course, which is based on 30 years of experience, me sharing kind of all my favorite parenting strategies to raise children to thrive. But I want to have a look at the questions. So we've got like whole paragraphs here. So have a go and have a look. Okay, let me just see. So how do you deal with people, which includes a partner, if they continue to imply, even implicitly, that their view with regards to the child is somehow more valid as opposed to the father? So reasons they quote, and this, I've heard this so many times, so thank you to the person asking this question. You know, they're the ones spending more time with their child. It's kind of that like mother knows best type mentality. So how would you approach that?
Gosh, talk about impossible questions to answer. Because I don't think you can argue about the amount one parent cares for their child. And I think whether that's mum or dad, if mum's saying something that passionately and that strongly, it's because she believes it's the best thing for her child. So I think as a dad, you need to listen to that. But I also think there's two sides to every conversation, and there needs to be a meet in the middle. So I think it's a listening exercise between couples, and hearing both sides and coming to some sort of some sort of meet in the middle.
I mean, I work with so many parents in lots of situations. I've helped a lot of dads over the years that have been denied access to their children. So sometimes a lawyer will get in touch, or a social worker, and the courts have actually said they need to do a parenting pause. And I want to really, tell everyone out there, some of you may be, separated from your children or not seen them like you, Tim. And it's really, really not about the time that you spend with your children. It's not like a question of clocking up that time. It's the relationship and connection that really counts. And some parents might be around their kids all the time, but they don't have that connection. And you can be living in a different country, like you. I told you when we first spoke this story of my friend who didn't see her son for years and years, and now he's back living with her, and after a difficult period. But if you can just focus on your relationship and your connection, and not spend your time worrying about what a partner thinks or anything else, and really focus on that. I've got a question which actually was raised by one of my corporate clients the other week, who they chair the family network in a law firm, and they were saying one of the challenges is how to discuss or present the need for flexibility for all parents, obviously not just mums, to team leaders and line managers who have partners that are kind of stay-at-home spouses, and they don't really understand or appreciate that struggle and juggle and tension and stress. So that's like you mentioned earlier about line managers and things, but how to get them to understand and appreciate that even if they're parents themselves, other people have different experiences and need different things.
Well, that we said we've come so far, and that's a bigger question. That's the diversity and inclusion question, not just men and dads, because having empathy for someone whose situation is different from your own, like, that's a life skill I'd like to give everybody, and it's not one that anyone's perfect at. But it has to be something that's actively pushed, and line manager training has got to be crucial for that, hasn't it? Like regular training and refresh that message as often as you can, and as simply as you can, because we're all busy. You'll get too many emails. So if there was something that someone could develop for line managers that was like a one-page crib sheet. I do
a lot of that, working, speaking to line managers and, helping them to kind of. The other thing that I always say is, obviously I'm going to say this because I'm biased, but being a parent, as well as, your responsibilities at work, does give you so many transferable skills. I remember a conversation I had years ago with this guy at Bank of America who was saying, I had this really massive corporate client, like a huge investor, and I had a really stilted, difficult relationship, and I always had to brace myself every time I had a phone call. And this guy was in his 70s, and the one I was speaking to was younger, but he said, from the minute I became a father, our whole relationship changed, because we were able to talk about something else, and he saw himself as this person that could give advice on parenting, and the whole relationship with the client changed. I've run talks for dads, for hedge funds or VCs, and when you get a whole group of people in the room and they're talking about their responsibilities as parents outside of work, again, it's what we're saying about building that relationship and connection, which can actually enhance your relationships with clients and all sorts of things. So it's having that mindset of not seeing it as something that holds you back, but you manage your time better, you have a real good sense of what is actually really important, you're more empathetic, you can manage difficult stakeholders, anyone who's tried to get a 2-year-old who doesn't want to get into a car seat. Any challenge at work is just nothing compared to that. So
Rachel, you can see me nodding like this, and that's because since I've come back from that period of depression and I've learned how to talk openly, it almost now doesn't matter what the subject is. And I got promoted this year at work, and so I'm a senior consultant and actuary at Aon now, and you get to senior consultant at Aon by being able to lead client relationships and have that open conversation and that connection with a client. And that is a skill that I only really learned by going through this process and coming out the other side. And I can walk in, you can put me in a room now with any human, and I will want to know what is interesting about that human. I will want to talk to them about what it is that makes them tick. And that skill I got from going through this process. And you're exactly right. Becoming a dad definitely gets you as a man more in touch with that.
Just you become more emotionally intelligent, right? You just know how to, you're more aware of how you show up, how you connect with people, all of that. There's a question, if you have any more questions, keep them coming. There's one about Andy saying he feels in a minority by being that modern dad. So he's quite unique in his organisation. Very often he's the only dad in the playroom or wherever, and like finding it hard to socialise outside of groups. And it says, I've become the sole volunteer trustee for a community charity that I attend groups with to make a difference. But I mean, in the past I've had on some of calls like this a guy called Michael Ray, who's based in Australia, and he's a single parent, and his whole story began, I think he used to be like a bodybuilder and a security guard, but his daughter was in a ballet show and he wasn't allowed into the changing room to help her get ready, and like that started his whole journey of, equal parenting and banishing gender stereotypes. But I don't know what advice we could give to parents who feel like they're in a minority, whether how they speak about openly being a parent at work. Or
you can't change that overnight, in my experience. It is sad, and I've got two things that go through my mind when I was listening to that. One is the self-care comment, because if you look after yourself enough, that you're strong enough that it doesn't matter whether you're the only one in the room saying something, then you're still happy to share because you're comfortable to do that. But that's so difficult to teach people to do. But the other thing is, if you get a network going and it won't change tomorrow, but it might next week or next month. And so I think we could start the ball rolling now to get a culture that's better in a business like that. That's what we did at Aon, and it took 6 months to a year to get to where it is now. But it happens if you start.
Yeah. Well, I really want to obviously thank you, Tim, for your time and for being so open and hopefully inspiring people just to really start those conversations. Like we were saying before we logged on, a lot of this stuff is free. Like obviously I work with a lot of organizations and I come in and I run events for parents, but just having that internal network of support, that place to normalize common challenges. So thank you so much. You see Deborah saying you're amazing and truly inspirational. I would love, just before you run away or log off, please, if you want to share, what is the one thing as a result of listening to us wittering away, what is the one thing you're really going to try and action? Like just write it down so that there's more chance it will actually happen. Just one main takeaway, one thing that really resonated or something that you're going to try and do. Parenting Out Loud is one. And we will, like I said, we'll share the chat. Please, if you found this helpful, share it with colleagues, anyone else that you think needs to hear this stuff. And I'm going to share some further tips and things. Stand up for parents in the office. That's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah, so everyone loves that expression, parenting out loud. It's just something you can really tap into and remember to do, right?
Yeah, ask your colleagues, how's the family? Simple question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you really everyone for your time. Happy International Men's Day, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. But really thank you very much for joining, everyone. Yeah, work-life harmony, I love that term, rather than balance. There, we've got lots of emojis. I'll pause the recording.